Hi, everybody. This is Round the Table, the monthly podcast put out by the Skies of Fortune crew, and we have a great lineup of guests today to discuss designing character options. So let's start. I'm just going to go across in the order I see folks, and you can introduce yourself real quick, tell you people what you do on the TTRPG scene. Let's start with Josh Ohmer.
Hi, I'm Joshua Ohmer. I create stuff for 5e D&D and publish on the DMs Guild. My main product is Smoke and Thunder, which is a series of gear guides based primarily around firearms. But what I've been doing most recently is player species and races for exotic creatures that you can play in D&D.
Great, and that's perfect because that's exactly what we're talking about today. All
Yep.
right, or one of the things anyway. All right, so how about
Yep.
Dave Austin? How we doing today, Dave?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. I'm David Austin, but you'll find me online under DH Austin. I've published a couple of fantasy novels. I've written for Hexagram Magazine for Steve Jackson Games, developed my own role playing game called Rocket Patrol, but it ran into some development hiccups just a couple years ago. So it's currently on hiatus, not being released anytime soon. Been playing tabletop role playing games since I was 12 years old, and I'm 61 now. So
Yep.
just happy to be here in the conversation.
All right, happy to have you here. All right, let's move on to Fern.
Greetings, I'm Malkis, but online I go by Fern. I am an amateur game designer, owner of Studio Hex, and game designer for One Sick Puppy. My current projects are Hellborn, which is on hiatus due to some development difficulties, and in the meantime I'm working on a urban fantasy horror game, Keepers.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that's cool.
It's still in its infancy, but we're getting somewhere.
Okay, cool. And by the way, I wanted to just say one thing real quick. I don't think you have to qualify by saying amateur. As long as as far as I think everyone here goes, as long as you're working on something, you're just a game dev. That's just all
Yeah.
there is. Yeah.
It's just I'm very young. Like I'm definitely the youngest guy in the group here. I'm barely 18. And I have like 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 40-year-olds.
That's true. I don't.
That's what I mean by
I'm
amateur.
not sure how old Drake is, but the rest of us are definitely past 40. So anyway, speaking of Drake, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. I am Drake. I'm with Game Master on Demand. I make digital design and help people world build with stuff. I also have a 5e expansion setting that I use as my own homebrew setting that I'm working on as my Patreon. Is my main little push right now. Link in the bio and all that stuff. I'm actually 37, and I live here in outer Seattle-ness. And we all start somewhere, and I'm just
Yeah.
excited to be involved as well.
All right. Happy to have you here, and we're gonna post everybody's contact stuff or their whatever they want me to post in the YouTube description. So make sure to look there if you catch here wind of something that you like. So in any case, I usually like to start these off with like a thesis for everybody to either agree or disagree with, but it's from there that I draw a lot of my questions about what we're going to be talking about, which once again is designing character options. So I thought about it. I always take a while to think about these concepts um, as the weeks roll on towards the eventual recording of these, and I I came up with about three or four different things I think sort of that make up the character option development. And I'm gonna just read this off, and you tell me if you agree or disagree. So typical character options in a TTRPG often boil down to the following: first, type, which can be like race or species or ancestry, depending on what your nomenclature is. Occupation, which can be like class, job, or skill set. What I like to call spice, which is the extra stuff you can put in, like feats, merits and flaws, backgrounds, advantages and disadvantages. And the last one is equipment, weapons and armor, gadgets and wondrous items. That kind of thing. fun stuff. That, however, I think can also be classified as a reward. So it's really today the first three: type, occupation, and spice that I think we should talk about. The equipment could be its whole own thing. Probably any of these could be a whole
Yeah.
podcast by themselves. But we're just going to try and talk about these. So first of all, what did you agree or disagree? Do you think that type, occupation, and spice are a good way to break down the types of character options that we often design for our games and for our projects?
Seems like a fair breakdown. Would you did you say you included skills in the spice category?
I put that under occupation more as like skill set.
Under occupation.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very fair as well. I do think there are obviously games that break this formula, but I'd say a good 50, 60, maybe 70% follow that formula.
Okay. Yeah, obviously there can be like things like original, and Dave, you can tell me if I'm right here, but in the original D&D, like the red box wasn't dwarf like both a race and a class?
I think for elf.
Dwarf and
I
elf,
remember.
yeah.
Yep. Elf, dwarf, halfling at
Halfling.
one point, I think.
Which was Hobbit back then, if I remember correctly.
Was it Hobbit? Did they actually call it a Hobbit?
Hobbit until I think like some copyright issues.
Okay. Well, I can see why they would have.
My dad, who used to play 2E, does remember it as Hobbit back then.
Okay. And here's a question: would he have played like an English language version of it, or was there a translation?
I do not know. There was a 3.5 translated version. I actually have a monster manual here, and I have found some VTM books that are in Greek, though don't know about 2E and all that.
Okay, gotcha.
2E, 1E, yeah.
Okay, so anyone want to disagree with my breakdown?
I mean, if I'm making a spreadsheet,
Well, I have
agree.
one.
Like, if I'm making a fresh character, I would slightly disagree because I'm more of a concept when it comes very first
Okay.
to, some character design. But again, that like if I'm talking major side character or depends on the character. But again, if I'm just making out a nice little block of NPCs or something, then yeah, totally, I highly agree.
Okay. And Dave, you had something you were going to maybe disagree?
Well, not really a disagreement, but it's more of a question about
Yeah.
how you define what you're describing. To me are what I would consider thematic elements. It's descriptive elements that helps tie the character to what the focus of the game is supposed to be. But
yeah.
very little of what you talked about is the mechanical side of character abilities. So you never mentioned something like ability scores. So where would you place that?
Well, I would put that is a good point. Designing character options. So that might
Because
be.
I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something that is interesting about that is when I started, because none of us really understood the game was supposed to work and what it was supposed to be, abilities were characters. So if a player in the party had a strength of 13, that was significantly different than a player who had a strength of 10.
Right.
But over time, as we all know, in the modern versions of the game, the ability scores themselves have less significance, and the modifiers are what everybody cares about. So it's more important to know how your ability score modifies the mechanics of the games, and so we focus on that. So that's why I bring that up, in that there can be game designs that use ability scores, such as Steve Jackson's The Fantasy Trip. The scores themselves are far more significant because there are no ability modifiers. All your die rolling is based directly on the score that describes your ability.
Right. Now, I would say that when it comes to actually designing character options, what you're referring to sounds to me more like a core mechanic of the game, like what defines the character's abilities. What I'm talking more about is how are we creating like different kinds of things that a character can.
That's why I
be.
use the word thematic. That's why I use the word thematic. In game design,
Yeah.
You're usually struggling with two different elements all the time in your game design, and that's the mechanical aspect of your game and the thematic aspect of the game. It's how the game looks in the mind of the player. That's thematics.
Right. So maybe it is more thematics that we're talking about here. Although when we're talking about designing character options, we are eventually going to get into mechanical things like rules. Like
it is definitely a good mix of the two. There's a lot of thematics, but there's also a lot of mechanics, at least most of the time.
and they're going to always intermix to some degree, I think.
Exactly. They influence each other. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Because if I may give an example, if you want to play a game like where players feel powerful, the player options will obviously be a lot more powerful and they will do more flashy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, if you want them to do more mundane stuff or feel weaker, obviously all the thematics of the player options is going to be weaker, more grounded, and perhaps even seem simple and mundane.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and they describe what the game is supposed to play like. I think that's a great description.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, for example, there's a difference between, this power that I get from my class gives me a +5 bonus to shooting with certain weapons, and, this power allows me to stop time for me and, like, focus, Max Payne style. I think you see the difference between, I just get more powerful with my weapon, and, I become Max Payne and John Wick.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or any number of characters that Keanu Reeves has played, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's a good distinction to make sure that we're kind of focusing on, thinking about the thematic and the mechanical and how they interweave as we're making. And I think that's almost something that, like, as a game designer, like I like how that's put. And I also it's almost something that I think I as a designer have taken for granted. Like I never thought of it in those terms before. So it's good to sort of put a name to it, a name to that those two aspects of the game design that have that sort of tension between them.
I think that there's a term for that. Things like ludonarrative something. I've heard the term ludonarrative.
Well, there's ludonarrative, all kinds of things. The one I hear most often is ludonarrative dissonance.
Yeah,
but
when like the themes and the rules of the game don't really mix.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, which usually happens when someone loses track of what the thematic elements should be focused on, and they generally get more focused on mechanically how to make the game work as they see it, and then start adding thematic elements that conflict with that because they can't hold themselves back. They want to add too many thematic elements instead of just staying with the theme that they originally had.
Like adding laser guns to your prehistoric RPG or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel called out.
No, I also feel kind of called out because in my own game, Hellborn, it's all about being like a demon in hell, working for higher powers, and then there's just cyberpunk elements. You can have cyberware, which I later found out that doesn't really stick together, doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's that actually reminds me of a game system called Torg that is a multi-genre system, and is about invading realities, trying to conquer the modern day Earth, and one of the invading realities is techno demons. They are they're literally demons from a hellscape that are supported by magical cyberware, and without their technology they can't survive.
Question.
Yes, Torg reads very much like Alternity, one of
Yes,
Wizards of the
yes.
Coast's last opportunity to jump into the science fiction role-playing game market. They are the same kind of rules that when you read them, they're inspiring because it's like, this is so creative. There's so much being done here. But when you actually sit down with the group and try to play it, it sort of just starts to fall apart.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. Here's my quick quip. Did that game come out before or after Doom?
Torg is the original edition of Torg was like 89 or 90, something
Okay,
like that.
okay.
It was from West End Games.
87 to 89.
Okay, okay. But Ulysses Spiel out of Germany has acquired the rights and brought it back through a series of crowdfunding campaigns over the past like 10 years ish. Sadly, we have not had time to run a campaign, but we've played some of the starter adventures, and it runs pretty well.
Good. Okay.
As long as all your players are on the same page, right? That was the same thing with Alternity. If everybody
Right.
wants to play the same kind of game, the rules are brilliantly crafted, but the rules give you opportunities to drift into so many other areas, particularly in character creation, that anybody at the table can take the game in a different direction. But anyway, let's get back to the subject at hand.
Yeah.
I'm about to say we should go back to track.
This can dovetail well into one of my first questions, which is if we take my thesis at it, a few of my questions are based around it. So if you're designing types, what I'm calling types, like species and ancestry and races, how do you decide to put in and what to leave out? And this can, as far as Josh, if you want to think about the kinds of things that you decide to create, not necessarily for a specific setting, I mean, you can take it from that direction too, I think.
Oh, wow. For me, it's just what sounds cool. What would I like to play as? I'm not designing a specific game, so I'd be making different decisions if I was. I'm throwing options that anybody could import into D&D. So it's like what mythological or horror or whatever themed being would it, do I think it would be fun to play?
Yeah. And like I think it's not the rule of cool exactly, but like that's a marketing thing too, right? Because you got to bring
absolutely.
You got to bring something in that the players can latch on to. Yeah,
exactly. Right. It's when I'm generating these as one-offs, each one has to stand, not as part of a setting, but as just hey, I'd pay $2 for that.
Yeah, there you go. And when go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, when I was creating ancestries for Skies of Fortune, one of my main things was, can I picture this particular ancestry as a pirate? And if the answer was yes, then they would probably go in the game. If the answer was no, or they were an elf, then then they didn't make it in. Nothing against elves and people who like elves. I just didn't want to include that particular race in the game for various reasons, which I will not get into right at this moment. But that's why I thought that I put in lizard folk because I can imagine like a lizard person like wearing an eye patch and waving a cutlass and existing in a steamy jungle, and that was kind of what brought it there. And and if anything, and also I felt because we had a lot of animal folk in the game. We had sometimes call it a pet shop of a pet shop anthropomorphic creatures, yeah. And there's going to be various people who are into that, and people seem to really like playing as cat people and dog people. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say the key element that is successful in any role-playing game that it decides to take the step into the anthropomorphic forms is that you get a built-in sense of how these different types of characters are going to interact with each other, because everybody already knows cats and dogs don't get along, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, or mice and cats don't get along, or snakes and birds don't get along. You can't not write that into your setting. If you do, you're kind of having a dissonance there, and that works. That works for a game designer who's creating a game where they've chosen anthropomorphism is going to be the primary driver for all the different kinds, but I'm going to show everybody how these relationships work in this setting. It's a brilliant way to start a design.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something else that's interesting. If you look way back to Chivalry and Sorcery, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with that one. Chivalry and Sorcery.
Go on.
It was considered one of the most complex role-playing games of its time, and it only had humans. But the designers decided every class, by economic class, of humans in medieval Europe was going to be detailed in the rules. So it became, so their types became economic distinctions of different types of humans. So
that's interesting.
You can take something like that, compare that to something like Traveler, which when Traveler hit the scene, they introduced some new types of creatures that were both anthropomorphic and human but alien, and a lot of people didn't understand that playing those other different types of creatures in Traveler didn't really change the way Traveler was played, which they were trying to follow in the same footsteps of Dungeons and Dragons, which the game doesn't really change very much. And that's what I want to just wrap up what I'm saying here. That's the goal. When you're creating any different types of kin or race or species of your game, if you introduce something that inherently works differently in the game than everyone else, you're always going to struggle with that element. So it really, you can call the things anything you want. You can have as many broad ones as you want, because as soon as you have a description of how they all work, people can create their own races for your game just by looking at the same development.
Yep. I want to take a moment to say hello to Ibrahim, who has just joined the call. Hey, buddy, do you wanna say hey, or are you just here to listen? You can go and let me know in Discord if you just want to listen.
Until then, I was gonna say earlier, at least in my case, when I go to when I have to design like player options, be it races or classes.
Yeah.
In the case of races, I have two essentially paths that I take. The first one, which I did for Hellborn, is we first made the lore, then we designed the races. We figured out, okay, what do we want to do with this race? What do we want to add? What do we want to make it cool? And then I designed the rules around it, which it has its benefits, but also has many disadvantages, because on one hand, designed, it feels more rigid as to what you can do with the species, because then it has to adhere to the lore you crafted. On the other hand, the other method that I have is I first make the races, then the lore, and this also applies to like a lot of other stuff. Like I first make the rules, then the lore. I first add the archetypes, then the lore, which I done with my second game. And at least to me, it adds a lot more freedom as to what you can do later down the line, because you're not stuck to having to follow a set lore.
Wait, I'm not sure I quite understood that, Fern. So you said that you created the races or your types first, and then you created the lore. Is that?
In my first game, yes, and
right,
I found
okay.
that there was a lot of flaws, but also some benefits, because then you have a more clear idea what you're working with and what you're trying to make. On the other hand, you can do the exact opposite, where you first make the player options and the rules, and then the lore, then everything else. You build the lore around what you want to do with the rules. And the player options.
Okay, gotcha.
Which
I
really seems like what they did with Alternity. If you've read the Alternity rules, it really seems like they had some very creative ideas for different types of creatures that hadn't been done in a science fiction setting before, and created them first, then tried to explain to you how they all fit into that universe. How do all these very vastly different types of creatures all get together and do jobs on the same starship? That does
Right.
sound like a system I've seen used before.
Yeah, both ways they're not novel ideas. Like it's honestly, I didn't think of them. I just
Right.
discovered them, and I think both ways, both types of, you know, both methods of making stuff have their benefits and their downsides.
Yeah.
I've heard this concept referred to in world building as top down versus bottom up. It
Yeah,
sounds like a similar.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much the exact same thing. I do want to apologize in advance if I sound a bit incoherent. It is 2:34 a.m. my time.
No, that's totally fair, buddy. We appreciate you being here,
course.
despite the late hour in your home country.
It's my pleasure. Don't worry.
Yeah. So I'm gonna poke Drake a little bit. Did you have anything that you wanted to say about the particular topic of types or things that you may have put together for your
Adding
homebrew
on to
game?
like the idea of sometimes, you want to add into tropes and lean into things like cat races and dog races don't get along. But I don't know. I really enjoy turning things on their head and adding a weird spice to certain elements for things. And then, the best creators steal and then embellish and add it to their own creations, as a
Right.
lot of people say when it comes down to things. So it's like, I have a race of Sahelians, octopus centaurs, like Ursula from The Little Mermaid. Like they're super popular. They're an amazing race. D&D and Wizards has never actively really touched them, but they're a great race. But I'm like, okay, how can I make them weirder or stuff? And so I go to the idea of let's make weird extremes of above water and below water transformations.
Yeah.
Just by the way of things, if they're below water, they don't have mouths, and they have extra eyes that come out of stalks from the back of their heads, so they can look around them as they swim. When they're in water or they're out of water, they have mouths and their eyes go back into their skulls. It's very weird, but it's an idea of transformation because they follow a sea goddess, since the whole idea of ebb and flow, and you lean into certain things, but then you add in some weird of your own character spices and the things that you like, because Animorph pride. I love Andalites, so yeah, I'm gonna get a mouthless Protoss like face and stick some eye stalks on my octopus centaurs because that's just gonna look cool.
Yeah.
And you know,
I see where you're coming from. I mean, you're gonna add a bit of your own twists on things, right? And playing there is value again in playing against type too. Um,
it's a struggle, but if you do it just right in a good campy enough formula, that's why like Cronuts and like if you're a baker, if you're a kid into like world building and like game design and like almost as if you're trying to get people to consume it, you want to make it an interesting twist on a classic. So I always find it's really great to, do that. Like one of the things I'm working with is I'm making a 2D20 Don't Feed the Plants. It's the Little Shop of Horrors. And
okay.
I don't know if you've seen like the original ending of the musical Little Shop of Horrors. Plants actually win and they
Yep.
take over the world. And there's this 26-minute long kaiju film stuck at the end of the musical of all these plants destroying New York City. And I'm just sitting here like, God, that would be a really cool Fallout game. And it's wonky enough, it's whimsical enough, it's funny enough, so you can see like the breadcrumbs and things when you start looking at character concepts and you start seeing, even if you just look at them in their base components of what are their stats, what are their jobs, what are their duties, and what are their species or race, and you're just kind of like, oh, this could work. This is a good. I find myself doing that with all sorts of movies and TV shows, and because again, really, you can look at those building blocks and you can look at all that stuff, and you know that's the whole master builder idea of can this character concept work with this one? Will it? Won't it? Let's find out.
Gotcha. I wonder if Ehrlich, did you want to say anything? You're welcome to unmute at any time to pop into the conversation. I feel like you might, in given your project, you might have some things to say about like how you implement races and different races and species into your game.
Well, he did say in the roundtable chat that he cannot talk right now.
Oh, he can't. Okay, is that what he said? Okay, I'm sorry. I did
Um,
not.
I'm here to listen. Children are sleeping and can't talk right now. If it was me
Oh,
off and allowed
okay.
John to talk, sorry about that.
Sorry, I didn't notice that channel. Okay, that's all right, buddy. We'll catch up with you. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so my next question was if we want to move on to occupations, if we consider that to be a big, a an important part. How do you? This seems to be the place where you can really differentiate characters more than any other place, right?
Indeed.
If you're designing classes, um, so how, so when you're creating occupations, how do you differentiate your classes or your skill sets or your jobs or whatever it may be in your setting, or your or whatever, or your add-in content, and how do you keep different kinds of players in mind when you do it, right? Because you have to admit that there are certain players that are drawn to certain classes typically.
If I may go first, because I've made a multitude of classes for my own game,
Yeah.
Hellborn. Uh, in Hellborn, you play as mercenaries, agents, call them whatever you want. And when I sat down and tried to think, okay, what class do I want to add to the game? My first thought was like, what type of mercs would work in a crew? You have like people that are good with guns, melee warriors, you know, faces, the guys who do all the talking, doctors, etc. But then you also have to add the layer of, oh, this is hell. There's definitely some supernatural aspects to the whole being a merc thing.
Yeah.
Thus, I added like stuff like the demiurge, which is essentially a guy who can project his soul outwards and use it as a weapon. The malefic, who's a witch, or the zealot who can call upon the powers of the archdemons, and who becomes stronger the more archdemons he's devoted.
Gotcha.
I think, in my opinion, when you have to figure out what archetypes you're gonna add in the game, you need to figure out first what is the overall theme of the world, of the setting, and then the theme of the game itself.
Yeah, definitely. Setting is the most important thing when I come to any kind of occupation, or that sets technology, that sets tone, that sets, you have to have the actual tonality of what are they doing? Is this industrial revolution? Is this urban fantasy? Is this,
Yeah,
it's a
because it would be
big
real if you
difference.
because it would be real if you have like a guy who's good with guns and you're playing in a rock punk setting.
Yeah.
But I guess so. I
Or
guess
if you're in
like
the Old West.
yeah. So I guess if you have something like a slingshot, I guess that would work.
I don't
I
know, a
want to
druid
talk
with a
about that
seed pod and a
that
flame
other
pod.
aspect that the other aspect that was mentioned, which I think is probably just as important, is the player. What is the player looking for? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where developers really have a challenge today, because you're not going to swing the opinions of the player camps that are classes everything and class doesn't have a place in role playing games. They're two very strong camps. They have very strong opinions about that. So when you set out to make your game and you make a decision, I'm going to have classes, you're going to lose a whole group of players that will just dismiss the game because they don't think class belongs. So you'd have to have a real strong argument for why class belongs. So I think that's a very important aspect of development at this point in role playing games. That
What?
so
True.
many people are so exposed to podcasts like this and other podcasts and opinions about the role of class versus skill versus talent. It's divided into pretty hard camps today.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely.
that's your job as, oh, good.
I was gonna say, yeah, I've run into that, and I think that I think the strongest argument for an indie game that you really want people to dive headfirst into is that class is helps you to communicate to the player how you would like them to experience your world. Because if you're going to be, for instance, in Skies of Fortune, you can be a duelist who would be like an Errol Flynn type character. You can be like a Sky Witch, which is going to be more like your typical rebellious kind of magic user character. You can be, um, and various other things like that are going to, you can really tell everybody these are the different ways that you can exist within the game world. But anyway, that was my first argument. But go ahead, Drake.
Oh, that's great because it builds upon your marketing though in your game. It comes down to like, everyone's kind of tiptoeing around and talking about it's like it's the issue and but it's also now the responsibility of the indie game designer to make that part of your marketing mission and your branding guide to whatever you are producing at the time is to immediately set the tone of what your characters and what your class is for the game. Of course, when I see sky pirates, I would have want to be a sky witch. I definitely want to be a cloud shifter or some sort of definitely yes, I want lightning all the time. And it's but that's what you would expect from a sky pirate game, and then you would expect that from a hell fantasy, or you would expect it for urban fantasy. And so that's kind of our responsibility too, is to set the tone. And I've kind of come to that too, and I have my homebrew setting and how I call my 5e stuff an expansion pack, because we're old enough to all remember Game Genie and the expansion shit you used to plug into your console to
Mm-hmm.
make your game a little bit better and a little more customizable. And that's how I think about my stuff. They don't want all my dichotomy. They don't need it. They can plug and play with whatever they want to. You just want to pull a stat block and pull some history. Have at it. I'm glad you're a Patreon. But if not, then yes, please use all of my world lore and use everything that I've developed. But my pantheon is very diverse, so I have a science and time god that's using crystal necrotech next to a war god who's an Olympian wood nymph. So it's very different. But at the same time, their cities and their capitals and their countries, thousands of miles apart, look very different. I can package that different as an expansion pack and be like, oh, this is the weird sci-fi tech god. You want to buy this package, or you want to buy that. And so it kind of comes down to, again, your marketing of your class and of what you're selling to people to try to promote what you're doing. Like I'm gonna push my own urban druid in my science area before I would push something else that just didn't seem to have any relevance. But it's just kind of, man, how you make those building blocks fit together, how you make all your stuff appealing, how you make your it all kind of like, again, where are you playing, how are you doing it.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, yeah, that is some good points. Okay, we'll see you later, Ibrahim. Have a good one. Um, yeah. So I guess let's go back to the question real quick. What do you see different kinds of like player types out in the world, and what does anyone have sort of a theory about the different kinds of TTRPG players who might pick or like play a certain way or want a certain kind of class? I have to admit, this isn't one I didn't think too much about, but yeah, go ahead.
Actually, Cyberpunk Red has something that I think really. How to explain this? How leveling up in Cyberpunk works is that there's these things called improvement points, and you get different improvement points by adhering to your player archetype, if I can call it. And it has four. Now, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but it's something like the warrior, the explorer, the role player, and there was something else. I don't remember which one. And essentially, the more things that you did, or the more impressive things that you did to adhere to the archetype, you got more IP. But to go back to the question, I think the main archetypes in the game, which also in like TTRPGs, which also corresponds to the main pillars of TTRPGs, are the explorer, the warrior, and the role player. Because people like to fight, people like to roleplay, people like to explore. And
Those are the pillars of D&D, or what they say that the pillars of D&D are too, I think.
yeah, but I
Yeah.
feel it also is like the main pillars of many games. Different games have different pillars and focus on different games. Like Cyberpunk definitely is a lot more about the exploration and combat aspect of the game. Vampire the Masquerade is a lot about the role playing, but it's definitely heavier on the role play parts. And stuff like say D&D or Pathfinder are more combat, if I may say.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's where the newest edition of D&D really missed an opportunity, in that they don't seem to have any idea what attracts people to Pathfinder? And it's something that you guys haven't mentioned yet, and there's an element of these games that has nothing to do with exploring, role-playing, or combat, and that has to be character development. How much of your game allows the player to build a character into something that they have a vision of? And Pathfinder is a heavy character. In fact, I often call it's a character creation game, not really a role-playing game, because it's geared, all of its mechanics are geared around building trees and connectors and abilities that complement. So there are players out there that's what they want from a game. They want a game that lets me tell a story that's just about my character. I'm not so interested in the story of the campaign setting, but I'm building my character. And the newest player's handbook, which I picked up at Gen Con for D&D, really doesn't, and I think that's a purposeful decision. They don't address creating the character as a gameplay aspect.
I mean, that's kind of your responsibility. Like, if you are only TTRPG and you're only playing one game, that's the dungeon master's job. And like, that's their player responsibility, is to make the character creation involved with the world and involved with the story. At that point, it doesn't matter what your main story is. It has to start involving them, or it's not really interesting. And like, you know, even if you're railroading somebody on a scenario, it's just like, nah, you can definitely make some stops.
But that's from a storytelling. That's from a storytelling perspective. I agree with that completely, and it does talk about that in the player's handbook. From a storytelling perspective, the character development in the story should coincide with the campaign development. But Pathfinder really goes out of its way to say it doesn't really matter what the story is or what the character's story is. There are mechanical decisions that have to be made every step of the way, from equipment to feats to levels of different classes that are taken to complement each other. That's all about mechanically creating the character.
Yeah, and that's Pathfinder.
You're saying it's a game about crunch.
Yeah, it is.
Well, it's crunch, but it's a very specific kind of crunch, because players are I used to run Pathfinder games for years. I've met players that's their passion. That's the only reason why they're playing Pathfinder, is because they need to see how this character can be built.
It's
if
like,
I may add,
go ahead.
When I tried to get into Pathfinder 1e, I think, if you ask me, the sheer plethora of options, the hundreds upon thousands of different things you can pick up for your character, can be really, really, really intimidating, not just for players, but for GMs to run as well, especially if they are not familiar with the game or really, really dedicated to sink their teeth into, the system.
It's not baby's first TTRPG, you know.
No. Yes, I agree. But there is that demographic of players that's what they want.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And that's Pathfinder players, and that's why they pay Pathfinder. People that don't want that or want a lighter version of that, pay 5e. Like, see, that's finding the lane, that's finding the narrative, that's finding your audience and finding the right player. They're like, I love Pathfinder, then you know they're gonna love all of your like skill boxes and all of your levels, your crunch, and all of your stats. They're gonna completely be all into that. If they're a 5e player, they might be overwhelmed. They could easily be turned off by that. So like, that's the whole shtick, is like, you know. Like,
so as a game designer,
great. If they love Vampire, they're going to be heavier into role playing. So yeah, you have to listen to them.
As a game designer, those are the decisions you make at the beginning. And which one of these paths do I want to hitch my wagon to?
Which is why I picked 5e still, because I'm like, I would, you know, even with the new, like, I hate their branding. I can't believe they didn't call it like 5.0 or something for the new edition.
It's a mystery. It is kind of funny,
but but like, one of the reasons why I chose to stick with 5.0 and like 5e and make it an expansion system was because if I go all in with Pathfinder 2e, I don't even know if I could generate or make enough of the information that is needed to make like good character creation in that game.
It's trying to learn how to play Magic the Gathering today.
Yeah. So so I'm just kind of like, so I'm like, nah, I'm still gonna hitch my wagon to this 5e. Yeah, no, I get it. I'm still gonna do this.
I'm gonna start
But yeah,
playing Magic
finding
the
your
Gathering
audience.
today, and someone tells me there's 50,000 rules I have to be aware of.
Yeah.
Right.
Josh, do you have anything to say about making the decision to move to go stick with 5e?
I mean, for me, it's what I know, but I will say that talking about Pathfinder, like, I started DMing during 3.0, 3.5, and
Same.
like I loved it, I enjoyed it a lot, and then I ducked out during fourth and kept running 3.5, but I realized that
Same.
for me as a player and as a DM, like Pathfinder, I saw what Pathfinder First Edition did, and it was like, oh, this is for the kind of player who really, really, really liked what 3.5 did and wanted it to do more of that, and I wanted it to do less of
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good perspective. And I'm
Oh
gonna have to
boy.
duck out of this here soon. I wish I could stay for the rest of the conversation, but I'm gonna have to leave soon. So I'm gonna hang on for as long as I can, but I may just disappear. Thank
Okay.
you, everybody. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you too, Dave. We always appreciate your contributions.
It was a pleasure talking with you.
Well,
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
yeah. So let's see. Do we want to? Does anybody have any more thoughts about occupations or classes or skill sets? Like, I think there are definitely games. Like, let's talk about World of Darkness real quick, because that doesn't really have classes, so to speak. It's kind of like make your own
Love World of
occupation
Darkness.
based on your
Yeah.
skills set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I said earlier why that World of Darkness is such a roleplay heavy game, because unlike say D&D or Cyberpunk, the only thing that really makes you unique, no, what am I trying to say? There aren't classes. There's like your clan, your tribe in Werewolf. There's like your, what's it called again? I forget the name.
Concept.
Yeah, your concept, but there isn't really anything like a class.
Well,
Right.
I would.
The concept's on the sheet.
Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah.
pretty much like it summarizes what you are. Are you a noir
Yeah.
detective? Are
I
you a sorority girl? Are you a
Yeah, I mean, sure, your clan gives you access to some disciplines, or your tribe gives you access to some gifts, but it's not. But I don't think it's anything like a proper, say, 5e class. It's way different.
Right. But it's sort of like your clan sort is basically your type and your class.
Yeah.
It's your social archetype, if I may.
Yeah.
well,
Because
that's if you're a vampire, then your blood potency is going on with that too. Or then if you're a werewolf, it's what what tribe you're in, and then like what family and all that nonsense, and the hunter clans
Yeah.
are their own complications. Because I came
Well,
up in 3.5 and I latched a hold of World of Darkness and Vampire the Masquerade really hard because off the
Well, let me just
kids,
wrap
oh
up
yeah, I'm
with
gonna
one
grab
thing
this.
from me is that to me the games that do it the best are games that have classes or roles or occupations that you can pick, but they don't confine you to only being able to do a specific number of things, and you're always envious of other characters that can do something you can't do. So those games that do it best are the ones that say, yeah, you're really good with guns, but that doesn't mean you're totally incompetent at talking to people. You can actually learn to do that.
Yeah.
So
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you don't have a dot and drive, then you can't drive a car.
well, that's the way Traveler was. I don't know if you guys remember Traveler. I played Traveler in 77 and 78. And if you didn't have any skill ranks in, operating a grav APC, you just couldn't. That's the way people interpreted it. It wasn't the way it was meant to be played, but that's the way people interpreted it. And so it got to be very confusing where I don't have rifle skill, so I guess I can't pick up a gun and pull the trigger, So you look for games that have a syncopation, I guess is a way I'd like to say it, where things that seem like they might be out of rhythm can be in rhythm within the game mechanics, even though it wasn't designed to be that way. There's an ability for you to do that. That's the best design in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can always act without proficiency.
Right, which is something that they came about in when skills were introduced in second edition, and then proficiencies kind of built on that in third edition. They didn't clarify it very well right at the beginning that hey, you can still make this check, you're just not proficient in it. That's
Yeah.
very clear in the newest editions, but it caused us a lot of confusion at the very beginning. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, guys. It's been great. I've enjoyed talking to all of you, and I'm going to have to step away.
All right. Have a great evening.
Have a good one.
What do I want to say? I think one pitfall that a lot of designers, me included, fall into when designing classes is giving them too many things or too many options. Because that's a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, oh yeah, players have a lot of options. They can have very many things. They can have builds, and this can attract people, but it can also detract people.
This is the same thing we were just talking about, I think, with 5e versus Pathfinder, right?
Yeah.
The amount of crunch that Pathfinder has makes it difficult for new players to really sink their teeth into.
It is, but then again, is it? Because if they're older enough players, then, like, I remember Savage Species, and then I would just, as GM, be like, okay, so if you really like this and want to be this as your character arc, then you're going to have to, like, take 15 levels of Succubus.
Right. Well,
and you're going to have to multi-class with your racial class to go up to get all these really powerful abilities. Because they used to do it, and we can still do it, It's just a weird...
Yeah, I hear you. What I was saying is like new players to the TTRPGs rather than new players to Pathfinder is what I was getting at there.
Yeah, Pathfinder in and of itself, that's just a daunting mountain, man.
Yeah.
It's the Everest of TTRPGs at times. You just kind of look at it and you're like, whoa.
And yet, very popular, and it's not a competitor for D&D. I mean, nothing is really, but yeah, except for Skies of Fortune, of course.
The audience. Oh yeah, naturally. Piracy.
Yeah, Sky Piracy. That's going to be the next wave, boys. All right. Go ahead.
Doesn't remember Captain Shakespeare, like Stardust, because
Oh yes, love that,
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Character.
Like, come on, Sky Pirates. I've been one of the cities that I'm really working on right now. One of their previous large trade was building airships. They built them so good that they hardly have to repair them now. So a lot of the workers are despondent.
Oh no.
Makes this whole class situation start rising that we were kind of talking about before, and then that's a whole different aspect of class. Where it's like, oh no, the workers are really bored and the rich people aren't doing anything about it. What do you do?
Yep.
That never ends well.
Exactly. It doesn't, or it does. That's the party's decision, not ours.
Indeed.
Now, shall we get back on track?
Yeah, I'll throw you another question. So my third thing was spice, which is like feats, advantages, disadvantages, merits, flaws, backgrounds. So the question is, in what ways would you use spice to help your players change things up with their character? What do you think is a good way or a good system that allows for a lot of character customization and character differentiation with things that are not race and class or species and class? Also, go ahead.
Go ahead. I really need to think this through before I actually give it an answer. Go ahead.
Okay. I can tell you how we do it in Skies. We have like an advantages and disadvantages system where you can basically taking disadvantages gives you negative points and taking advantages gives you positive points, and they have to even out in the end, right? But you can do things like, become extra good at a skill or a trait. Or you can take things that allow you to be some kind of mystical creature. Like you could be an undead, for instance. Or you could be cursed. Or you could be able to sense ghosts around you. A lot of things like that allow you to change it up. We kind of base it around like Savage Worlds and World of Darkness, where we try and think of ways. Okay, so if my character's like this, how does this change the way I react to the world? How does it change the way that my character is not just your run to the mill duelist or elementalist or sharpshooter. Those kind of things.
I would definitely
I
say
think
a good session zero always helps.
Good session zero. Yep.
I mean, if you're
yeah, that certainly
TTRPG, like a good session zero always helps to get that. But then, like, sidelining with characters being like, okay, so what's your character's deal? What's happened? Would you be comfortable with this? How do you feel about these things? Test the waters and see where they are comfortable with their character going in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because, like, oh yeah, you want to have one of your limbs augmented so you have better reflexes when you're quick spelling or shooting something, or let's do that. Sure. Make up a mechanic. And 3 or 4 episodes in, your arm gets cut off. And,
Mm.
everyone's really surprised except you because we actually talked about this. And, you ham it up and you make it a really good scene. But like either or I also have another like plot delivery device. I have a major corporation. I have a company called Obsidian Heart, and their whole idea is domesticating magical commodities and making it so like the things that adventurers use for everyday use, like a small gelatinous cube that cleans your house. Roomba.
love it.
It's just it's like you add these little spices to like the aspect of like, okay, so what's hot right now, what isn't, what could the characters use, and then you literally just Google ads, throw something up there, new from Obsidian Heart, are you looking for something to kill this creature? And like you try to like bring in weird stuff to hook them in. Like it all depends on like what they're working at, but I always find some sort of fun modern twist device, like Rocky Talkies, people having like a rock with a message stone to it.
Yeah.
Just blows
Nice.
people's minds all the time. You could do little things like that. Just makes a spice character like they just love junk like that. Players are really just ravens when it comes to them. You give them something shiny, they love you, and they bring money back to you, and then you throw more shiny stuff at them.
Yeah.
So, but that's one of my biggest ones.
I think from a mechanical standpoint, there's a couple of different like avenues that spice options can take. One is and I think Sizer, you mentioned both of them really. The options that make you better at what you already do, and the options that let you branch out and have an answer for the situation that you're not normally in. So like you said you talked about like being able to sense ghosts. Well, for most characters that's not maybe, I mean, depends on the setting, I guess, but not an everyday situation, but when it comes up, it feels really good. But you had that option, and you were the one who could do it.
Yeah.
Whereas you've got the stat boost or the weapon grafted arm or whatever that just
Or the person,
makes you the thing that you normally do.
or the stuff that allows you to personalize your character even more and make them feel truly unique from the rest of the group.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I think is the goal of the idea of the spiciness. To really help you put your stamp on the character. That I think is the mark of good spice, if you will. More than anything else. Okay. Does anybody have more they'd like to say on that particular topic?
Hmm, can't say I quite do. I think we've covered most bases. Though I
Yeah.
do think a good spice is something that adds both personalization, makes every character unique, but also has some mechanical
Oh,
benefits.
certainly.
Like, for example, in Hellborn, every character has a tarot card assigned to them, which, one, they can use to better flesh out their character personality, and also it gives them a sort of unique ability they can use to bend the narrative once per whenever.
Okay. What did you say it was? It was I heard Tardigrade, which I don't think that
The
was right.
tarot card, sorry.
Tarot card. Okay, got it.
Yeah, like for example, one character with the chariot card could use their card's ability to overcome one obstacle, no matter how tough it is. Or another one, the tower, it would be to cause a catastrophe. No, which you never know when it's gonna strike, but something bad is gonna happen sooner than later. You don't know where, you don't know when, you don't know to whom, but it's gonna happen. Stuff like that.
Yeah. I like that. It also reminds me of the Persona games, but that's neither here nor there.
I kind of
God,
like the idea of like equipping tarot cards as like certain benefits for things. I've been playing that Star Wars Outlaws game. I really appreciate and their experience and their abilities that you learn. You learn from mentors, and they're by doing actions in the game world. They're by like
Okay.
using certain abilities or shooting certain people at amount of time, or like taking down distracted targets or things of that nature. So it's kind of cool to like see and have the idea of like, okay, so you get three of the main like arcana cards, and then you get one of each minor suit. You can equip these and change things around. As see a kind of a cool idea of that. That's an interesting system.
It is. Hmm. I haven't played that. I've played Jedi Outcast recent, or not Jedi Outcast, but the one with the recent Jedi games. Fallen
Fallen
Order
Order.
and Survivor. Yeah, those are the two: Jedi Survivor and Jedi Fallen Order. So
Those are really fun, and they gave me hardcore Jedi Knight vibes.
they kind of
Like
did,
it
yeah.
was they very much gave me the old Kyle Katarn vibes, which is funny because his name's Karn or something like Kyle
Cal,
practically Cal, yeah, Cal and Kyle. I'm like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
video games, I see you. But there's no like talk like about his game using tarot cards in the underworld. It's an interesting idea to again like move your narrative and to move your characters and give them spice is to use that,
Yeah, and I like that
especially
idea
in a
a
health
lot,
game.
Fern. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. So
Pause.
we talked about this one a little bit already, about this next question a little bit, but how do you appeal to the player base with your character option designs, and how do you create things that they will find cool? Because that's the goal,
Well,
right? Because let's face it, your GMs probably buy the most books when it comes right down to
yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
players are your biggest demographic. So,
hmm
so how do you get them to buy into? How do you get them to want to purchase your product too?
Well, first of all, no matter what you make, you will never be able to please everybody.
Sure.
In my opinion, you should
Sure.
stick like one player demographic and try to appeal to them as much as possible. Because
Gotcha.
then because then you have people are gonna keep buying your stuff because hey, this guy makes stuff like this game has stuff like that. I like that sort of stuff. I'll keep buying to it. But to answer your original question, I try to make stuff that's cool and is first of all unique. You will not be able to find this in any other supplement. But what regardless of what you make, the most important stuff is that it does not overshadow already pre-existing player options because you don't want to make a meta in your game. Because this is not a video game where it has a set goal, which is win. This is a role-playing game, and your game goal is to make a game that does have an end goal. You can approach things with different paths. I'm going in a bit of a tangent that I have no idea where it's going.
That's okay. Um,
I think the 3 a.m. energy is finally hitting me.
yeah, we're about
I,
that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say you make a good point there, Fern. Though that player loyalty is based around them seeing themselves in your product in what you're doing. They you if your product has its own identity, then the people who find it and who identify with that identity are going to are going to stick with it. They're going to when they see themselves in it, they'll keep playing.
Now, I think there might actually
And
be a danger in getting too unique because part of the appeal is to get into something that's recognizable to an extent, right?
yeah,
Well,
you want to stay close to something that's
Yeah.
grabbable enough in the psyche that's just kind of like, oh, that's funny, but also really like appropriate when it comes to the setting. Just have to give something that has that whimsical camp energy. You have to have a
hmm
certain crossover between, oh, that's clever, and that's also really useful because that would exist here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
wait,
Ju- just like you have to find a good balance between lots of player options and few player options, you also have to find a good balance between unique and derivative.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean that's ironically like that is one of D&D's strengths and weaknesses is that it's designed to be whatever whatever you want it to be. It serves so many different potential genres. People complain about how everything is a 5e skin these days or whatever. And but it works. Like it appeals to a lot of people because you can do so many things with it.
Yeah.
that's kind of why I love it. Like I said, I globbed on to 3.5 when it first came out. That was
Mhm.
like my first edition. Then I also really loved the Open D20 that came out of that right before fourth
Yeah.
edition. The D20 SRD that came out after that produced the World of Warcraft book, the Farscape book, pretty much every core book of any sci-fi universe kind of started
Yes.
existing suddenly in the late 90s, and it was great to have all of that. So that's why I love 5e right now still. That's why I keep making the things that I make in 5th edition and for characters and for people now is like, oh, this is whimsical and new, like it's practically a lightsaber, but let's put it in the game. And it's
Right.
just because people want that, but like not everyone, but someone will. And it's just the fact that it's good to have. I'm glad that uh, Wizards and Lego are starting to play together again because it's like I never got why Lego, they call it the system. Is it compatible with the system? And it's kind of
Yep.
like that's the same thing with D&D. Is it compatible with the system? And
Yep.
I'm glad that they're working together because that's how it should be in an open 5e game or any kind of fun role-playing environment. You should be able to just bring anything to a dungeon master and be like, "Hey, I found this online. Can we work this in to make my character more interesting?" And people should
Yeah.
always be
Yeah.
like, "Yes, let's do that." Like
Yeah.
more interesting sky pirates. Like, hey, I have this amphibious octopus creature that is my familiar now. It lives in the clouds. That's okay, right? Of course it is.
Right.
And you find a way to make that character and that person be seen in that sense, even if it's just a cosmetic, because that's just what makes them happy and makes them more engaged. Then, okay, who are you to say no?
Yeah, right. It's always good as a DM or GM to be able to do the yes and or some variant of that. When somebody comes to you with something they want to do, you should want them want to support them in doing that as long as it's not disrupting the fun for everyone else.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Definitely.
All right. Let's see. Let me look through my questions here. If anyone else has anything to say on that topic, now would be the time, I would say.
No, can't say I do. I'm pretty sure, as I said earlier, I think we covered most bases with all our questions thus far.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw out, I think, one of one of my last questions here, which gives everybody an opportunity to kind of brag on themselves a little bit. Okay. So, what is the favorite character option that you've created for one of your projects? And let's go in reverse order this time. So let's start with Drake.
Um. All right. Well, what I'm working on right now, 'cause again, I love repurposing things, is I have a race of parasitic brain slugs, because why wouldn't you? And they're called the Scree, and becoming a symbiote with a Scree is always optional and like willing. That's one of the biggest things when it comes like on my main world is that you have to be willing to do it. It's not an unwilling infestation. Um, but the idea that you can have a creature that lives in your head that enhances your abilities and like becomes kind of like your partner in crime because it is a sentient consciousness that's in your head consistently. So, giving that and having that as an option has been kind of interesting lately too. And not just because, oh, this is a big power increase, like you're increasing ability skills, you're increasing people's actions in combat. And how do you counterbalance this? But when it comes to not being in combat, the social drawbacks are kind of really severe too. Because even if people are like, yeah, it's willing, people are going to look at you funny. They're going to be like, oh, you're one of those people. And it's kind of a stigma to have this ideology that people are looking at two beings in one skull, and it's a little strange and a little new because the god of death, and is it death? Is it rebirth? Is it life? Is it codependency? And I just tie into the idea that humans are actually like really good with these brain slugs. They Humans and them have a good DNA genetic match that make them very cohabitable, and they kind of level up with each other and they do things. So it's been interesting to mess with them and work on their ability scores, and I'm working on putting them out as a species in my adventure module that I'm putting together that's set in this metropolitan mesa. It's this giant towering plateau within a rainforest that has multiple levels. It's ruled by mind flayers and has class and justice and necrotech and all this craziness. It's the most advanced place on my planet that I've thus created, and learned a lot about it in the last year. And so it's interesting to see because, like, as you would imagine, but kind of not, like, mind flayers are a little bit threatened by another ideology of a brain slug creature
Mm-hmm.
in favor with their
Eating
god.
slug.
So yeah, they don't like the idea, and their pope is super racist, and it's a big thing and a big part of the story of the campaign, because I also believe that some of the things that we do as creators and science fiction and fantasy and any kind of fiction has existed as a subtext and as a commentary and a commentary on our social norms that are going on now.
Yeah.
So you kind of look at the despondent falling of the American dream and the end of late stage capitalism, and you kind of try to, and you don't get preachy with your characters, but let's instill some values to make sure that when this falls apart, you guys are nicer people to people in the survival.
Yeah.
Like, we
I
also just have a fun time.
Yeah, indeed. I think there's room for having putting a little bit of your own belief system into your game. I've certainly am guilty of that. Um,
Which
y-
is, full circle. I come back around to who doesn't wish that they could at sometimes just put their hands up and say, "Okay, Brain Slug, you're in charge now. You do
yeah.
it."
I'm stressed. Your turn.
Yep, you release the happy chemicals, and I'm gonna take a mental nap. You're in charge now, buddy.
Well, very cool. I like those ideas. Okay, so Fern, how about you?
Right. So, in my opinion, at least my favorite, and also most of my players' favorite play option that I've made is the Zealot archetype that I mentioned earlier for my game Hellborn. So, to explain how Hellborn works is that every archetype has essentially a set of abilities from level 1 to level 5. Now, what makes the Zealot unique is that they begin with a perk that every time they get a high level perk, they get a devotion in one of the 9 archdemons. And as they progress, they get more powers, which have different effects depending on what their active devotion is. So the Zealot is essentially a stance switching character, in a weird way. For example, let's say you have a level 1, level 2 perk, you would have 2 devotions. And the perks from the perks you have, they have different effects depending on which of the 2 devotions are active right now. I'm pretty sure I'm losing my mind.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's weird. I'm sorry. I
N-
apologize.
No, you're okay. We know that you had a late evening, so do you
It sounds
wanna?
very interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in some it's just that you have devotions, you change what devotion is active, and every ability from the zealot has different effects depending on your active devotion.
Okay. That's so. That's got some role play aspects to it too. It sounds like.
Yeah, because you're essentially playing a mix between a cleric and a paladin, and a demonic one at that.
Yeah.
Nice.
A blackguard is
Sort of, yeah.
sort of, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Fern. Let's move on to Josh.
Okay, probably my favorite character option that I've done is my nymphs species. Um,
Ooh.
it's yeah, so I found it a little odd that 5e never statted nymphs, you know, as a fake creature in Monster Manual or anywhere else that I've found,
So suckiness,
because
man,
they
I
used
totally agree.
right, yeah, so that, yeah, I mean they were in every previous edition, and now they're not here, and I was like, you know what would be fun to play. So it's just like they were always ridiculously powerful before, but I said but I was like I never thought they needed to be, like historically, you know, in classical mythology, you know, they are nature spirits. You know, they have some power, but you know, they don't necessarily strike you dead with a look. You know, so I looked at, you know, the closest thing that 5e had, which was dryads, which are a type of nymph, you know, historically, and I extrapolated from that. Okay, well, how would I stat a dryad, and then and then from that, how would I stat several other types? And I came up with 8 subspecies. So you can play as a dryad, a maenad, a lampad, a oread, naiad, and I don't know. Anyway, a whole bunch of them.
Nice.
And so you know, they're all, you know, they all have, you know, powers of charm based on their beauty, and then they can also, you know, do things, you know, based on being, you know, masters of whatever aspect of nature or whatever aspect of the supernatural, and uh, so it turned into a whole bunch of different customization options, all in one, kind of. And I thought that was a lot of fun, and I also, like, because they hadn't worked them into the lore, I decided to, you know, spend a chunk of time in the product, you know, explaining, you know, what you know, how these are like elves but not like elves, and how they are connected to the 4 elements, and you know what they could do in, you know, in your campaign world.
Okay.
So there was a little something there for the player and for the DM.
Very cool. Yeah, I definitely think that there is a certain kind of player who would be like, I want to be a sexy nature spirit. Come on, you know.
Yeah, I
Right?
thought that actually.
Yeah. Remember the weirds? Remember the elemental weirds that were just like,
Oh gosh, yes.
yeah, chicks made of elements with pools of like, you don't walk in that, you will die.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
All
it's
right.
very cool.
Should I give one too? I may as well, right?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so my favorite option, I'll just talk about my favorite class from Skies, which is the Tale Teller, which is one of a magic class, and it's kind of based around you know, the pirate saying "Dead men tell no tales," you know, and the idea about the Tale Teller, they're a little bit like a bard in that they can do heals, they can do a lot of buffs, but the buffs they can do are special because all of them are based around famous pirates. So, for instance, you can use the tale of Blackbeard to like increase a character's fire abilities, because Blackbeard was known for putting fuses in his beard, you know, and to also allows them to stun people with a ferocious roar once per turn. Or you can do something along the lines of let's see, who's another one? Long John Silver. Okay, this is a more social one where for a period of time it allows you to become very good at lying about who you are. Because if you recall, at the beginning of not the beginning, but midway through Treasure Island, was John is introduced, he is masquerading as a regular sailor rather than as the fearsome almost pirate captain that he is, you know. So things along those lines. There's going to be 10 different tales, at least in the base game, all based on sort of famous pirate characters in the real world, some of whom are fictional, that we are importing into the game. Um, so that's just for pirate nerds who can be like, oh, I want to be able to do this special ability that this particular character was known for, or something along.
Jean-Luc, and you'll have some little pincer maneuver.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Bringing real world legends into a fantasy setting.
Yeah, we have a lot in the game. We have a lot of corollaries between real world countries and our own. Like, is very similar to Seventh Sea in that we have an England, a France, and a Spain, and a Netherlands, and a Germany, and a Scandinavia. You know, stuff like that. So. But yeah, that I enjoyed hearing all of your opinions today about designing character options, and I hope we can have you all back sometime to talk more. Pardon me, I'm not crying here. I just got a little thing in my throat.
No worries, no worries. I won't judge anyways.
Yeah. This is just so good. I just can't believe it. Okay. So anyway. I hope let's just do real quick. You can find Skies of Fortune at Skies of Fortune on Twitter, or and we also have a Discord where we do development. Where can they find Joshua Ohmer?
You can find me at Linktree/Ravenquill or Raven_Quill on Twitter.
How about DM's Guild? What do they look for there?
Oh, sorry. On DM's Guild, you'd be looking for Joshua Ohmer. Unfortunately, I don't have a publisher page. DM's Guild just goes by author name. So Joshua Ohmer.
Okay, and where can people find you, Fern?
You can find me on Discord, pretty most of the time, but I also have a Drive RPG page.
Okay. And what's the drive-through RPG page? Is it Hellborn or Fern or
Studio Hex, actually.
Studio Hex? Okay, so look for Studio Hex on you said drive-through RPG. Okay, and last but not least, Drake. How about you?
I'll be dropping the links to my stuff.
Cool.
Here in just a second.
And Drake, if you want to be found, where can people find you? Are you there? Well, that'll be in the that'll be.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
It was muted. GM on Demand on Twitter and Game Master on Demand on Patreon.
Okay, very cool. Everybody, thank you for watching today. We hope you found this conversation helpful, and we will be back, rather, this podcast will be back in another month with a new topic. So have a great one. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. This was one episode I did not want to miss because, frankly, designing stuff for players, be it my players or in any game, is my favorite part.
Okay, recording stopped.